This is iDesign Lab, a podcast where creativity and curiosity meet style and design. Curator of interiors, furnishings, and lifestyles. Hosted by Tiffany Woolley, an interior designer and a style enthusiast, along with her serial entrepreneur husband, Scott. iDesign Lab is your ultimate design podcast, where we explore the rich and vibrant world of design and its constant evolution in style and trends. Today on the iDesign Lab, we're joined by Alex Schuford III, President and CEO of Century Furniture and the Rock House Farm family of brands, including legendary names like Hickory Chair, Hancock Moore, and Maitland-Smith. A third-generation design leader, Alex has spent his life shaping how craftsmanship, innovation, and timeless design come together in the luxury furniture world. Please welcome Alex Schuford.
Welcome to the iDesign Lab podcast. Today we are lucky to be in studio with Alex Schuford of Rock House Farm Family Brands?
Yeah, Rock House Family Brands, sure.
CEO.
So welcome not only to South Florida, but to the iDesign Lab podcast. You have such a lengthy story that we hope to get into today about the family business of designing a life around a beautiful business of furniture.
But I think the first thing that I want to bring up or talk about is your third generation. Your grandfather started the company.
That's
and
right.
Your uncle, am I correct?
My uncle was president after my grandfather, and my dad worked with my uncle, ran all the upholstery operations, and then for a short period of time we had managers, not the family, running it.
Really?
And then family stepped back in and has run it for the last.
But three generations. That's a wonderful thing to talk about.
Yeah.
So American, I believe, too. Iconic.
Yeah. When did your grandfather start it? What year?
1947. We were a textile family before that. So we were yarn and twine from the turn of the century, 1800s, and then slowly got into fabric weaving. And in the 30s, my grandfather bought a fabric company called Valdez Weavers during the tough times. The family legend is he either won it in a poker game or bought it for $1 and assumed the debt, right? So whichever one you prefer. But he turned the fabric company around, was doing fairly well. And then once the war effort broke out, all the factories were turned over to the war effort. Then post-World War II, obviously a lot of GIs were coming back. It was a little bit of a boom time. People were starting families and households, and there wasn't enough furniture production, and there were a lot of shortages of materials. So if you were trying to get into furniture production or already making furniture, you were struggling to find metal springs and fabric, things of that nature. He happened to own a fabric company, so he had access to that material. And he was a connector. He was one of these great people that could walk into a room and 20 minutes later know everybody. And so he knew a guy in the government who had access to metal springs. And so he put two and two together, went around town, and talked to a lot of the small furniture companies about producing specific designs just for him. So we literally started as a white label buyer of other people's capacity. Famously, Buddy Cheryl's dad actually made furniture for my granddad for a while. That's right. And then after about 6 months, he realized that almost anybody could get into the upholstery business.
Right.
He started his own facility, but also then began construction on our case goods factory.
So somewhere in the late 40s, early 50s,
1947,
became a
48,
furniture
49,
company.
became a full-fledged furniture company. We still own the first facility they ever had. We actually produce furniture in it right now.
All in North Carolina.
Still all in North Carolina. Yeah.
So it started in North Carolina and
stayed. Yeah. And the fabric company still does wonderfully, sells fabric to most of the major players in the industry. They're now actually a 100% employee-owned company. We sold it to the employees. And
what a beautiful story.
Yeah, it's a good little American story. And third generation messes it up, so maybe I'm that guy. So far, we've been able to navigate through at least the obvious and major hurdles, like global
COVID.
pandemic, housing collapse, things like that. So we'll see. Maybe this next one will catch us. But so far, I've got enough smart people around me to keep me from my worst decisions.
So growing up, you grew up in the furniture business. But as a kid or as a teenager, were your aspirations and goals to?
They were not. So my first summer job, so I grew up on a horse farm. My mom raises thoroughbred horses, and so as kids, we were mucking stalls and feeding horses and baling hay, and she always would remind us that if we failed in life, there was a pitchfork with our name on it. We could come back and muck stalls. But my first real summer job was working in the furniture facilities. I worked in distribution, and then I worked one summer in the case goods factory, gluing corner blocks onto the underside of drawers. And then when I got into college, my dad, to his credit, told me do something other than furniture.
Really?
Get into a different business. And and so I sort of ran from it as for a while, and then I went to college out in California, and then post-college ended up staying out there. And as gravity is, I ended up buying a little fabric and decorating store in Northern California outside of San Francisco from two ladies that were running a little operation selling fabric by the yard, doing window treatments and top of the bed. And I sort of got my teeth into it and thought that I was better than I was, so I opened up a second one, and then we bought a third one, and we opened up a fourth one. And
so the entrepreneurial spirit was there as well.
And it was the category I knew at least something about, or at least I thought I did in my 20s. Later in life you realize you knew nothing about it, and thank God for a couple of really wonderful ladies that kept me from messing up more than I would have otherwise. But that early experience in retail and in design really helped sort of set me up to come back into the quote-unquote family business. And in about the 2001 timeframe, I came back into the
So did they pursue business and go after you, or did you have
it was a
goals
combination
of wanting to go back to North Carolina?
Yeah, no, I was living in Northern California, so no one ever wants to leave Northern California.
I know, right?
But you can't afford to live there, so then you have to make practical decisions. And I had just gotten married, and we wanted to buy a house and start a family, and so there was a temptation to kind of go somewhere where it was more sort of affordable to live. And we had, as a family company, the corporate entity, Century, had bought a company called Expressions Furniture. Mm-hmm. And Expressions was a custom upholstery operation that had franchised stores. But we didn't know anything about running retail stores because we were a manufacturer. But I was out in Northern California running retail stores. And so my dad asked me if I would go take a look at it and just give him an assessment of how this operation was running. And so, as a favor, I said, "Sure, I'll find some time."
So you came with a different perspective.
That's right. I had a little bit more of that. What does it look like to run a 7-day-a-week business and to deal with the consumer? And so, after a couple of months of sort of checking out a couple of stores, he and I had a long conversation, and he asked me if I would come help run the Expressions operation. And I sort of did it as a part-time thing with my retail stores on the other side. Because everybody forgets the original .com bust was in that 2000 time frame.
Yes.
Pets.com and all the original companies went under, and I was in Northern California running high-end luxury furniture and decorating services. So I had some time on my hands because things were a little slow. And after I got more involved, it's businesses are sticky. When you find, I'm a fix-it guy. I like to fix things. And so once I got involved with Expressions, there was plenty of stuff that needed to be fixed.
How many stores did Expressions have?
At that point in time, they were just under 40. Most of them franchised.
That's a lot.
It was a lot. It was a big operation. Small stores. They were all, call it 8 to 12,000 square foot stores.
Okay, but brick and mortar.
Yeah, brick and mortar and run by people. Franchising is a funny thing. When somebody buys a franchise, they expect it to be easy and successful. Mm-hmm. And the problem is it was also furniture, so it also had the element of being difficult and low margin. And so that combination required a lot of coaching, a lot of, sort of management attention to make sure the franchisees were successful. Some of them were wonderful business people and ran great operations, and other ones struggled more and took more hand-holding. And we also owned a factory that supported them, so that eventually fell underneath my umbrella, and I had to make sure the factory was full, which was something I think a lot of people in the industry don't think about when they think about this industry. Is we really our success is determined by how full we keep our factories. Mm-hmm. And so you do that with fashion, you do that with relationship, you do that with newness, you do that with pricing and promotion and discount. Whatever tool you can pull out of your toolkit. The deal is run your people 40 hours a week, because if they're getting a full 40-hour work week, then you're probably making money. They're probably staying with you. You're probably having some success. But if you start underfilling your factory, Now you've got a reputational problem locally. You've got all kinds of headaches financially. And so my job was keep that factory full.
And busy.
That's right. But I only had those stores to do it with. So
Right.
I was trying to find my way out of that. It was interesting.
When you were in college, what was your good degree? Was it marketing or? Because
Yeah,
you have an
it's-
interesting background in terms of jumping into retail.
Yeah.
And understanding retail is
Absolutely. It was, so I'm an English major.
an English
Oh,
major.
my
Okay.
goodness.
Creative writing as my concentration. And people always kind of raise their eyebrow at that. And I tell them, well, at its base, it was a liberal arts education.
Right.
So it was critical thinking, analysis, comparative analysis.
What a great basis.
But also communication, the ability to get an idea across, to
Right.
be able to verbalize that and say it eloquently so that you can influence others to kind of move forward with you. And I'm a big fan of people that have a broad concept of education, again, the ability to critically think, but have learned to communicate. And if you think about where we are heading, and we may delve
both are
into
lost
this
arts.
with AI coming on board as
Yeah.
quickly as it is, your hard science degree may not be as valuable as that person next to you who used to make fun of, who has a
Correct.
softer degree in something that's more aligned with communications. But yeah, I took a lot of business classes, also sort of alongside of that English major. And then I was just interested in the way businesses operated. I did a lot of sort of self-education, reading and listening and being around business people. But there's no better education in business than to go work retail. Like that's where the rubber meets the road in almost every business in America. And retail, we always think it's selling a physical item, but it's not. You could be selling a service.
Yes.
You could be selling a concept. You could be selling marketing. But
Right.
that ability to interact with the buyer, the customer, to get them to feel good about what's happening, to trust you as the seller, and then to consummate the transaction. Because a lot of people fail at that level, right? Don't forget to ask for the order.
Right.
Spend
Correct.
an hour getting them to like you, and then they walked out the door, and you forgot to ask them for the
Oh,
order.
he was a nice
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I had a nice, pleasant afternoon. Now I'm going to go somewhere else and buy the product. But that was a big part of my early education, was getting into retail and then having the success and failure of my little operation out in California be my personal success or failure. Like I was a sole proprietor. So the checks I wrote were out of my checking account, right? If we were short money that week to pay a supplier, it was my issue.
Yeah.
And
You were eating less that
I
week.
was eating less.
Yeah.
That's right. I was sleeping on the conference room table. I was figuring it out. So
I opened a grocery store at 21
go.
years old,
Yes, sir.
32,000 square feet, grew it to 42 stores in 11 years. My first 2 years, I would say, slept in the back room. I would take like Scott or towel boxes,
Push 'em all
put
together
them together, and that's what I slept on
You're
most
caught,
nights
yeah.
because I would finish work at 2:30 in the morning and store
up
was
and-
open back at 7. So I slept 2 hours in the back room. And
it is such I had a very similar story where I sold a friend and I had a house in the Bay Area. We sold it, and I kept saying, well, I'll find an apartment. And because I was working 80 hours a week, I never got around to finding an
the
apartment.
apartment.
And so I lived for 2 months in my office.
Oh,
I
my goodness.
actually had a shower installed
There
in
you
the
go.
back room with just like a wire
Yep.
with a screen. And at 6 o'clock, before anyone got into the store,
That's it.
I'd take my shower. And
That's it. I would wake up and go to the health club every morning at like 4:35, take a
Unbelievable
shower,
how we
I'd be back in
figure
the
it
office.
out.
And you do, and it's that grit.
It
and I
is.
think that's an underappreciated element in business success. A lot of people read about, well, you fail and you learn from your failures, but they don't, I think, feel what that means, which is you're willing to do anything and everything to make sure that this entity you have
Yeah.
stays alive. And it's like raising a child.
It
like
is.
You
It's
will
your
do
first
anything.
baby.
It's your first baby.
It really is.
And yeah, so that for me was sort of seminal. And when I interview people, it's usually something I'm looking for. Have you ever worked in retail?
Yeah.
Because there's an empathy that comes with that, both for the customer, but also for your fellow business person.
Yep.
To realize how hard it is to deal at the point of contact with the person that's buying the good. And if you have that empathy, then it changes your whole perspective in relationships and how you develop trust. And
Yeah.
So 42, that's no small feat. That's
42
in 11 years.
42 grocery stores, 6 liquor stores, and 4 pharmacies.
Oh, wow. Well, you needed
And
the
my
liquor
most
stores because you were in the grocery business. You had to have
Exactly.
My most frustrating thing was that we had pharmacies in 4 stores, but I was not allowed to ever go into or walk into pharmacy because I didn't have a pharmacy license.
There you go.
And I would have arguments with some of the pharmacists that I hired to run the pharmacist.
Right.
That's where trust comes in.
That's
Yeah,
right.
but
But
it
you
was-
work for me.
But
Yeah, but
legally,
you're not allowed to cross
to
this
go.
line.
You're not allowed in there.
I love it.
That's so
Yeah.
crazy.
But
So-
you were allowed in the liquor store, right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank God.
Yeah. So along the way in your early years, did you have any mentors or people that kind of
Yeah.
guided you looked up to you, got
did.
advice from?
I
Or
did. Well, I mean, primarily, obviously, my father was
Yeah.
a big one, a big influence. And I knew my grandfather, but he wasn't active mentoring me. He was more of this sort of idea of success.
Okay.
But my dad was someone I would reach out to and helped me along the way quite a bit. And then in retail early in California, there was an operation in one of the areas where I had opened my last store, and he was a really successful little decorating business there. And for a long time, I competed with him poorly. He continued to beat me. And classic story. I finally invited him out to lunch. I said, if I can't beat you, I'm going to at least
Yeah.
talk
Right.
to you about why. And I won't name his name, but I took him out to lunch, and we had a nice long lunch. And at the end of the lunch, I looked at him and I said, finally, how do you do it? Like I do X and you do X minus Y, and I do Y and you do Z, and I just can't. I can't win. And I was just down the street from him, and he looked at me and he
Right.
goes, so you rent? And I went, yes, sir. He goes, yeah, you're probably never going to beat me. I own.
right.
And it was lots of little tidbits like that over time where people had given me just really
Planted
good, similar
seeds.
advice. Yeah, the first 2 ladies that I bought the first store from were fabulous mentors, because I was 24. I
and
was a
what-
kid. And
I
they
know. And
were-
how did you even get to that
yeah, it was
realm
crazy.
at 24?
I was doing high net worth advising, where they hire young kids, recently college educated, that can speak well, and they send them out there to try to build up a book of business. And I was focusing on kind of the one area I knew, which was textiles and furniture, et cetera.
Okay.
And I wandered into this little store owned by a couple of ladies out in California, and they were delightful. And after a long conversation, at the end of it, I left them a card and said,
If you're interested.
if you ever want to sell it, call me.
Did something spark an interest when you saw the operation?
It was a fabulous location, but they were struggling with brand identity and a few elements that I thought, gosh, I could fix these things. Just where they were getting 5,000 cars a day past it, but they had named it, in a way that everybody thought it was an Italian restaurant. So, and I was like, because it took me a long time to find it, and so I said, gosh, I can fix this. And they laughed at me when I left them my card and walked out. And a couple of weeks later, they called me and said, "Are you serious? Because we might want to sell it." And and post buying it from them, they were in their mid to late 50s. I was in my 20s. They taught me a lot about how to deal with the customer, about just the sort of finer points of design and
Did
decorating.
they stay on with you for
I
a
was just
They
period?
did.
ask.
They stayed on with me to the very end. And Sheila and Linda, if you're out there listening,
They love
this is a
that.
shout out for you. But they wonderful ladies, and they were patient with me. They were stern when they needed to be. Even though I was the quote unquote boss, they were effectively raising me as an empathetic executive. And then when I got back into the family business, there were any number of people. The guy that brought me back into the business himself, a gentleman named Bob Marisich, who famously went on later to run the Las Vegas Market Center, and their company ended up buying about 60-70% of the real estate in High Point, where the
Right.
big show is. But he was the president
Wild.
of Century at the time, and he was an incredibly charismatic leader. And from everybody I've worked for, you always try to take away the elements that you think are really valuable. And from Bob, that ability to sort of command a room, that charisma to get people on board quickly with a concept and get them moving as a group towards the execution of it, was kind of a superpower he had, and something that, again, I'm people are often surprised by this. I'm introverted by nature. If you give me a personality test, I'm an introvert. But they say, wow, you don't come across as an
Right.
introvert. You
I'm the
come
same
across
way.
very
You
extroverted.
don't.
Yeah.
But it's all about, at the end of the day, does that wear you out and do you
Right.
need to recharge, or what does that charge you up? But the skill of learning how to understand a group of people, feel their energy, and then move them together as a group towards a goal, that's a learned skill. You can do that. It's like I tell my kids, like public speaking is just a learned skill. It may make you nervous, but you do it enough times in a row, you will get good at it.
Right.
And I learned a lot from him. There was a great upholstery person. I've actually just hired him back as a consultant at the company, matter of fact, named Bob Chapa, who was a wonderful merchant, but even more so was fabulous in a factory. And that's a whole different skill than being in front of a customer. People in a factory see things differently. They come with a little bit more, skepticism when you approach them as an executive. You've got to show them. You've got to, you have
He has to know how
prove
to
yourself
do
to
every
them.
single
That's right.
probably part that's in that factory.
And if you're an executive, that sort of skepticism of, well, you're just trying to make my day difficult. You're just trying to, you're trying to make, and his ability to get them aligned, an employee that is actually producing the furniture, was something that was a unique trait. He was, a baseball player. He connected with them on sports. He could communicate with them in plain language to get across a concept, not demean them, not assume that their opinion didn't matter, and create real, esprit de corps, And so each one of those along the way was an element that was important. And frankly, a lot of my competitors have been mentors over the years, some active, where I literally meet with them and they share and I share, and some who I seldom met with but watched what they do from a distance. Buddy Sherrill was an unbelievable competitor for many, many years. And I probably only met Buddy Sherrill 2 or 3 times in my life, but I watched what he did, studied what he did, learned a lot from seeing how he ran his company. And, I think, again, if you're a student of your industry and a student of business, you're always looking for what something somebody does that's successful and something that somebody does that isn't. The maybe biggest lesson I ever learned was from a company that went out of business twice. Literally went bankrupt twice. So it was a company called Furniture Brands International. They owned Henry Don, Drexel Heritage, Thomasville, Broyhill. They were world beaters. All the big brands.
Right.
They were, when I was in the industry early, they were the example of the successful conglomerate. They were driven out of business.
Were they family owned?
All the brands had originally been family brands, but they had gotten organized into a public company.
Okay.
So this company went out of business, and then it got reassembled as a company called Heritage Home Group. All the same brands, bought out of bankruptcy by a private equity firm and sort of relabeled, and then went bankrupt again. And so you say, wow, what kind of lesson there's a lot of lessons in watching a company that goes bankrupt and what they did and what you should maybe think about not doing. And we are, in many ways today, a bit of a multi-brand conglomerate. Correct. And they were an example of us as a public company. And you say, well, what mistakes did they make that led them to that? So, and there are a lot of them. One is they probably undervalued relationship. They undervalued individual brand leadership and the autonomy of each brand to find its own way stylistically and from a marketing and distribution standpoint.
Quality.
And and we take those lessons, and they are bedrock for us. Like, all of our brands have independent leadership, and they have their own autonomy for direction setting. What they want to do from a product standpoint, they do. Like, I'm aware, but I don't tell Highland House that it can or can't do something.
Right.
I don't tell Hickory Chair what next new dining room table to work on. From a marketing standpoint, from a distribution standpoint, like we work really hard to make sure we don't think in a homogenized way. And
I think that's really important.
Yeah. And so people look at us all the time and say, why do you let that brand that you own compete with this other brand that you own? And I say, that's what makes them sharp. They sharpen themselves against each other all day long.
So 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when you came back into the family fold, was it that other company you mentioned?
Expressions.
But was that just Century and Expressions at the time?
It was,
and all of
yeah.
this newness and all these other brands are under
it's more
your
recent.
guidance and
Yeah,
leadership.
That's right. So at the time, the family company at that moment in time was Valdez Weavers, the fabric company. We had just spun off our yarn and duct tape company. So there's a branch of the company that at the time was one of the country's biggest makers of adhesive tape. And so my cousins run that business
That
and
is
own
so
that business
cool.
today. It's called Sure Tape, and y'all would know them as Duck Tape.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's one branch of the family. They do quite well with the adhesive tape. Who knew? Duct tape.
Yeah, no, it's,
I love
But at the
it.
time, so we had just spun them off. So the company was Valdez Weavers, Century Furniture, and Expressions Furniture. And so when I came back, I was working for Expressions. And then after a period of a few years, I kind of got moved back into the Century fold, and I was running some upholstery offerings for Century. And then kind of middle of the 2000s, as families do, that different branches of the family wanted different outcomes with their investment. And my immediate branch of the family was pretty dedicated to the furniture business. And so my father and my sisters and I bought the furniture brand Century from the rest of the family. And the rest of the family, a couple of branches, kept the textile company along with real estate and some other assets. And we took on the furniture entity and a pile of debt. So I'm very comfortable in the debt world, but I like to be debt-free because those early lessons in
it's a motivator.
That's right. Guess what? Great news is you own a wonderful old furniture brand that makes a small profit margin. Bad news is you have a pile of debt with Bank of America. Figure it out.
Wow.
And so over the next couple of years, that was 2013, we paid down all that debt. Worked really hard to get back to basically debt-free. And a couple of years after we bought Century, a great competitor and another mentor, we talked about mentors earlier, but another mentor to me, Jack Glasheen and his company, which was Hancock and Moore, Jessica Charles, and Cabot Wren, approached us. We actually had a conversation about trying to it's another one of those. I invited him to have coffee one morning because I'd always been competing with him. And at the end of this cup of coffee, I was a precocious young executive. And I said, Mr. Glasheen, it's been such a delight, chatting with you this morning. I've learned so much. And if you ever want to sell Hancock and Moore, call me.
Keep me in the
Yeah, and he sort of, again, kind of laughed at me. And then a few months later, reached back out, and we had a conversation and ended up buying Hancock and Moore. And again, borrowing a bunch of money to do it. And then we spent the next couple of years paying the debt back down and got back down to sort of debt-free again. And we had a really nice operation between Century and Hancock and Jessica. And at about that point in time, this company I just mentioned, Heritage Home Group, which was the second entity after Furniture Brands, was trying to sell assets because they were on the verge of bankruptcy again. And one of the assets they were trying to sell was Hickory Chair.
Jeez.
And so they reached out to us, and we had an old history with Hickory Chair.
I was just going to say, how did you know that would be something you'd be interested in?
Well, when we bought Century from the rest of the family, at that point in time, I had made a short list of other brands that if we ever got the opportunity, we should be interested in.
That was on the list.
And Hickory Chair was on the list.
What put that on the list?
So it was.
What did you like about it?
Yeah, it was one of the oldest operating furniture companies in the United States, founded in 1911. When it was founded, there was a Shuford family member on the founding charter.
Wow.
We were an original owner in the company. But shortly thereafter, the Shuford family member had sold out their shares.
Right.
In the 30s, during the Depression, a private equity firm out in New York had bought a group of furniture companies down in North Carolina, and it was the original Hickory Manufacturing, which became Hickory White, which is now a division of Sherrill,
right?
But also Hickory Chair at the time. And so they came down, they were going to liquidate the assets. They were, the classic robber barons. They bought it for nothing. They were coming to town. They were going to liquidate all the factories and sell everything off. And my grandfather and his brother and another person in town caught wind of the fact that these New York sort of private equity people were coming to town on the train to look at the assets they just bought and figure out how to
dismantle it. Yeah.
And so my grandfather and his brother and this other gentleman met him at the train station, and when they stepped off the train, introduced themselves and said, "We will pay you $200,000 more than you just paid for these companies if you get right back on the train and head back to New York." The deal is done right here on this train
They kept
station.
right.
And the guy said, quickest, easiest $200,000 we've ever made. Did the deal, got back on the train, and went right back up to New York. And so for a moment in time, we owned Hickory Chair again in the 30s. But they went back to the parlor at my grandfather's house and divvied up the companies. And the other gentleman took Hickory Chair. So we had these sort of multiple connections with Hickory Chair over time. And Hickory Chair had always been one of our best competitors. And I mean, competitor's a competitor. But somebody
competition's good.
Yeah, somebody we respected. They ran a great company. At the time, before we bought him, Jay Reardon, who was a legend in the business, had really rebuilt Hickory Chair back to glory. And what we saw was one of the marquee brands and an important employer, in Hickory, North Carolina, that was at risk of losing all the good work they'd done because they were just caught up in a company that had lost their way. And so we agreed, in principle to buy it. We structured a deal. Everything was going along swimmingly. And literally, the Heritage Home people called us up middle of the summer, and we were about 30 days away from closing the deal. And they said, bad news, we want to still do our deal with you to sell you Hickory Chair, but things are going so poorly everywhere else that we're going to have to file bankruptcy before we can complete the deal. And we said, no, just let us peel it out before you do it. Just let us complete our deal. And they said, I'm sorry, it's just we're draining too much money. We're going to file bankruptcy on Monday, like 4 days later. And so then we had to become the stalking horse in the auction process. And we got a whole new education.
Did that drag out for
it drug out for months and months. And, and it was the whole bankruptcy auction in court and the whole deal. And which we had, by the way, it was another chapter in my my MBA that I didn't actually go to school to get. And we ended up in the end actually being able to acquire Hickory Chair, but then we had to go out and do a PR campaign that, hey, Hickory Chair is in really good shape. They were just caught up in this company. We own them now. It's okay. Trust us, And that's been, I think, one of our strategies as we look at companies to buy is, we want to buy good companies with good people, right? We want companies that control their means of production, which is important to us. We run 9 factories up in North Carolina. We're makers of furniture, and so we feel pretty strongly about that. But we don't ever want to buy something so broken that it distracts us from our primary companies and then causes us to, after we fix the broken thing, to have a problem on the main ships. And Hickory Chair was that way. They were a great company. They were just caught up in a bad situation. The other thing we want to provide is safe harbor for the sort of classic legacy brands in the industry. We think there's something wonderful about these brands that have been around for decades, and that the up-and-coming consumers of furniture in the industry and up-and-coming designers, when they're told the story of the legacy, they begin to appreciate what that means, because most of that 100-plus year history of Hickory Chair goes into their product that they make today. Like, you can't replace 100 years of knowledge, right? And that sort of inertia and legacy and how they go about things. And for us to have enough competitive brands in the upper end that people, consumers, still see it as a space to buy in.
The names,
right?
too.
If all those brands go away, because Henry Don, which a lot of young designers won't even know today, when I was in the industry, was the upper end brand. They were owning Henry Don was, you really made it in life. They were a $200+ million company selling the finest furniture made in America. They don't exist today.
I know, that's what breaks my heart.
Incredible.
It really does.
And if you'd have told my father and my uncle, who competed with Henry Don for 40 years, that company, by the time that their nephew son was running Century, that competitor would not exist, they would have laughed you out of the room. It was inconceivable that a company that strong and that iconic, it would be like...
Why do you think they don't exist now?
It was a lot of choices made over a long... so no one decision can kill a company as good as Henry Don, right? You've got to string together 25 bad decisions.
Very true.
It's just... You have to work at
killing that brand.
It was just too strong. And so there was a lot of, I think, timing challenges, a lot of decisions made that didn't pan out well. I'm sure the people involved in the company at the time would point to the offshoring of production that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s as a component in it. I mean, so combination of bad luck, bad decisions, bad timing, and then ownership that at the time, was challenged with understanding an industry that is very nuanced, right? From the outside, I think investors see furniture and think it's heavily branded, it's a big dollar purchase. We ought to be able to drive efficiency and make a lot of money. Like, why can't we just do what Louis Vuitton?
I was just going to say, LVMH Group does.
That's right. They look at other luxury goods and they go, we should be able to have huge margins in this business. And what they underappreciate is that it's incredibly competitive to the point where the margins are very, very low. My staff will tell you, I kind of laugh that, if you want to be in the Hall of Fame in the furniture industry, you make 4 to 5% profit for 10 years in a row. And they'll put you in the Hall of Fame. 4 or 5% profit margins in the industry that is as difficult as this one. And if you want to get run out of town, then you lose 4 or 5% for 3 years in a row, and they'll run you out of town.
Right.
But success or failure in our industry is less than 7 or 8% swing on the margin side. And so, and the other thing that they underappreciate is the distribution world is very it's 1,000 mom and pop retail stores and design firms and showrooms, and those are all driven by trust and relationship, right? Because when they come to the furniture market in High Point, they have 1,000 choices for who to buy from.
So
right?
crazy, yeah.
And so all of that is relationship, low margin, and then high turnover, meaning we're on a fashion cycle twice a year coming out with new product and all the development that goes with it and all the inventory risk that comes with it. But an outsider doesn't see all that.
No.
They just see big multi-$1,000 transactions and branded merchandise, and we ought to be able to kill it. Get one of our MBAs off the bench, some guy, some lady that was educated at Harvard, plop them in there, and they'll fix this and they'll run it smoothly, and we'll make a ton of money.
Yeah.
There's one thing you didn't say, which I think has a big factor in it, is storytelling.
Storytelling is also
stories behind the business, stories behind the names,
Yes,
stories
I
behind
agree.
the items and the furniture. I've always been a firm believer in selling anything.
Yeah.
If you've got a great story, because the story people will tell. They'll tell their friend that story,
That's
and then
right.
that friend will tell another person. Yep. That's how that brand grows. And
I agree with that.
Your brands, and I know that I've heard a podcast that you were on. You're a believer in stories, and
That's right.
and
Yeah,
stories about just the individual items.
Yeah, and I think there's an authenticity around the ability to even tell a story like that.
Right.
That there are a lot of quickly developed companies that have sort of a marketing position, but they don't have a legacy and a story behind them. And
and that's what's so special
the story
about
behind
you
the
guys.
entity itself, and then how a product was developed, how it came to be. Right. We work with a lot of great product designers out there, and they're passionate about the item. The object, the why there is that little step detail in the carving around the molding of the top. And one of my favorites is Thomas O'Brien, who is maybe the finest furniture designer, who is an interior designer that, maybe has ever walked the industry. And every element of every piece for him is not accidental. It's very purposeful. Intentional. And if you leave it out, he's going to notice from across the room, and I remember
not be able to focus.
One of the first things we ever developed for him, our product engineers, this small table, and there was this little step detail, and they didn't have the right tooling to do it just the size he drew it, and so they used a knife that cut that step detail that was different. It was just a little thicker, and they said, "Well, look, it's save us a few $100. We don't have to cut a new knife. It's no big deal. It's not important." And he walked in the room. We had 12, 14 people in the room for this product development review meeting. And from 25 feet away, he stopped and looked at the table, and he said, "The molding's not right." And the engineers,
That's
of course, right off the bat were like, "Well, no, it's right," and he was like, "No, it's not right. Get the detail out, and somebody give me a ruler."
Yep, that's what I always say too on the job sites.
Right.
Where's my
give me my ruler and where's my detail?
Yep,
where's my
exactly.
floor plan? And because those things matter. And then the engineer thought, why would anybody notice? Thomas's response when we got into discussion about it later
that's a bad
that's right.
comment.
Don't allow yourself to slip like that.
Yeah.
And also, it's the combination of all the details in that table that make the whole a beautiful thing. And once you start letting one or two of those details go, right, there's a point where it tips, right? And you may not be able to recognize that detail completes it, but you just know it's beautiful. And every time you remove something, it's a little less so. And eventually it becomes less sellable and not sellable and then not attractive and then not a table you want to develop.
Each and every other detail, just elevating that more and more.
Every time you are purposeful and, and so that storytelling of the why on the item, the storytelling of the why on the collection, the why on the brand, the who we are, and then the connection of all that back through relationship, that when you walk into one of our showrooms at Market, you typically see the same faces. Like we're big believers and we want our people to be with us a long time. And if you walk through our factories and do factory tours, we have 35-year employees, 40-year employees. We have a 53-year employee right now working in our main office at Century who's been with us. I'm 52 years old. She started a year before I was born.
That's so amazing.
Right, Debbie? If you're listening, Debbie, shout out to you. But like that is the sort of bedrock of the company, is that tribal knowledge, and it gets handed down. We do a retirement breakfast, so our retirees come back to Century a couple of times a year, and we'll feed them, and we tell them how the company's doing. And these are people that have been retired 10, 15, 20 years,
but
and we pack the room with retirees. And I tell them at the end of every breakfast, I say, look, thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about us and for letting us stand on your shoulders. And if you continue to want to help the company, when you're out in the community and you see a great young person who is earnest and wants to find a company that they want to make a career with, send them our way. I said, I don't really care what their skill set is. I care what their personality is. If they show up on time, they want to learn, they want to work hard, you'll know who they are. And put in a good word for us, because you pay it forward by getting us the next you that'll be with us for 30 or 40 years. So
you're doing all the things that are the right things. A lot of things that people don't even think about doing or don't want to put the effort into doing.
Yeah, it's the culture piece, right? And
that
word gets tossed around a lot, but I think at its root,
and again, that goes back to stories, because people will tell that story. Yep. I retired 10 years or 5 years ago, and I came back for a breakfast. Yep. And they'll tell 5 friends, and those friends will say, they took you back for a breakfast?
That's right.
And you retired there 5 years ago? What kind of company is that?
And they might have a daughter or a son who is looking for a job who is great. And then, I may send Billy over there. I might send Jane over there because and I think, for me, culture is a real simple thing to define. It's what your people do when you're not around to keep an eye on them. Yeah. It's like, do they make the extra effort? Do they pick up the piece of trash or walk past it? Do they, it's when they're not being watched, how do they carry themselves?
Right. And do they have culture. That heart in them? Scott and I both came from family businesses, and I appreciate that so tremendously. And one thing I love about iDesign Lab and all the wonderful representatives of businesses, and even the ones I meet with regularly in the office, a lot of them are family-ran operations. And I feel like the industry, even though it's been my world for so many years, my whole life really, I feel like it's an untapped industry at the same time. Like, I feel like it's not the one people are talking about all the time, or the one you don't really hear about, and I just, part of with iDesign Lab is really selling that story that this is a family industry and a great place to hang your hat.
And it's unlike a lot of industries. It's a very tightly networked industry that people are supportive of each other. That there's a great community thread that runs through it. Like, some of my good friends are some of my biggest competitors, and we look between the hours of 8 and 5, we're trying to, get each other's floor sample opportunity and figure out how to get more of our business from them. And, but before and after we share information all the time. Like, how, do you need to come by and look at a piece of equipment? What are you doing in this area from a healthcare standpoint?
Right.
Just trying to make sure that the overall industry is healthy. And then I think that network and relationship back with our customers, and then among our customers with each other, it's different than you see in a lot of other industries that have become very sort of polarized, just 2 or 3 brands dominating it. The last of the great sort of cottage industries that is scaled large. It's a
huge industry.
It's a $50 billion industry, but it's a cottage business.
It is.
And that's what I think it makes it sort of fun. So, and there's no better place to see that. You go to the trade shows, and it's just people that haven't seen each other in a year or 6 months, and oh my God, how are you doing? Let's go have a drink. Let's catch up. And oh, what are you doing about this in your business? How are you using these tools? Or what are you doing on Instagram? And people are sharing and they're networking, and it's really pretty fabulous.
So, as the industry is continuing to grow, as I are, how do you see the future with the growth? I mean, it's interesting because I do talk to reps who come in, and I know Kravet was recently purchased, which kind of shocked me, I guess. I don't know why. I guess I was kind of in love with their family story too. And you just start to wonder, especially since I first started in the industry, everything was more segregated, and now it's all kind of...
I think, the Kravitz are good friends, wonderful family, and are still obviously very involved in the business. I think their situation is sort of a good example. Like, businesses reach a certain size where it's not a guarantee that the next generation is necessarily going to want to run it or be ready to run it or whatever the case may be. And it may be that next leg of the journey needs to be in partnership with another group. And I don't know the people that bought into Kravet. I know the Kravitz kept a large share of the company themselves and are still involved. But I think the group, as I hear them described, is very interested in operating businesses, and I think kind of famously they've got a rug company they own and a lighting company, and they're trying to knit together a nice group. But even our family, when we look at where we are, we've got we've built a business that's now big enough and complex enough that it's that it's hard to run. Fortunately, we got a lot of good people, and they overcome my bad management. But at the end of the day, it's a big, messy company. We have 1,700 employees,
Amazing.
9 factories, 5 different management teams. It's a big old cacophony of chaos that happens to work.
How many brands are there? What are
So the total brand portfolio is really kind of 7 brands, and there's 6 of them that are residential facing. So Century, Hickory Chair, Highland House, Hancock Moore, Jessica Charles, and Maitland-Smith. And then we have a commercial brand called Cabot Wren with a little sub-brand called St. Timothy's, and they sell commercial seating for office and country clubs and things of that nature. We show that brand up at NeoCon. But the other brands are, they're sort of all this sort of commingled, each with a little bit of an identity. But each one of them has, again, that sort of self-directed autonomy, which is wonderful because it makes us, I think, vibrant. But it's also, you can imagine, sometimes all the kids fight with each other. And sometimes we have to get in a room and we have to talk it out. Like, hey,
do they all have their own separate offices and different?
Separate offices, separate sales managers, separate marketing staff, separate sales reps.
Do you share any of manufacturing between them?
Some of the brands share a little bit of manufacturing, so
they share fabrics.
That's right. We do allow, famously, we allow you to move all the fabrics around between brands, but we operate legally in 3 silos. So there's a Century Highland House legal entity, and then there's a Hickory Chair legal entity, and then there's a Hancock Moore, Jessica Charles, Maitland-Smith legal entity that also rolls up Cabot Wren there. And then those 3 legal entities are all owned by the Rock House company, the parent company. And then, so my day job is sort of CEO of Rock House, but I'm also president of Century Furniture. So I'm down there amongst the brand presidents, fighting it out with the other brand presidents.
That's funny.
Which is funny, yeah. But it's a lot of fun, and again, it keeps us, I think, vibrant because each of those brands is exploring, and oftentimes we're stepping on each other's toes, because if somebody sees something in the zeitgeist of the customer base that is becoming interesting and popular, hopefully I've got enough smart brand presidents that more than one person is seeing it and they're pursuing the same thing. And then that we'll get that, I saw it first and I want to do it, and why don't you keep them? No. Let's see who does it better. Go chase it. Let's, if that's what's popular, if that's what our designers and our salespeople are interested in, then by all means, let's have multiple boats chasing that point on the horizon. I think one of the things in this business that is sort of the calling card for young people to get in it for is that feeling of community, and that ability to make a difference. Because look, I get that it's appealing to go after a big Fortune 500 job, and you're gonna. But if you are creative, if you are somebody that is empathetic, that knows how to connect with people, a AI-proof job of the future is somebody that can interact with other human beings in a personable way.
Right.
Because guess what? If you can do your job completely behind a computer screen remotely, probably some version of the future ChatGPT is going to be able to do that better than you, cheaper. But if part of your job and so much of design and so much of furniture is that interaction with the client, that ability to see them, feel them, understand them, administer a project, make sure it goes smoothly, be physically on site while the drapery installer's there and the countertop people. Like, that is an in-person, human-to-human job, and it's not going to be replaced by AI tools. Now, it may be enhanced by AI tools.
Tools will be
but it
used,
won't be replaced.
But they won't.
That's
And
right.
that's been some of my own research that I've been coming across, that it's really an industry that really AI won't tap into. And I think that should be celebrated. As having teenage daughters, we keep pushing towards like a high point concept for college and like
learn life skills.
And I just
it's a smart thing.
Want to bring in as much information for this industry. Where do you see designers and consumers as part of the industry growth for you and your brands?
I mean, the biggest part of what we do is we sell to and through the trade. So we have corporate showrooms around the country, great agent partners around the country that are our sort of physical representation in the local markets. We sell a lot of wonderful design firms through those networks that are vibrant, that are interacting with what I would say is the upper layer of consumers. And we're obviously a luxury products company, so we're sort of focused on that niche. But a lot of our retailers are figuring out how to remake themselves and do a better job of capturing the sort of excitement component that has to go along with luxury sales these days. And and that wasn't the case when I first got back in the business. A lot of the retail stores that were out there, had suspect housekeeping. You'd walk in and it was underwhelming. They had a lot of space, but they might not be using that space wisely.
It wasn't curated.
Burned out light bulbs and dirty carpeting. And,
totally.
And
sums up furniture
that's right. And I think that transition is afoot right now, where people are realizing, and partly credit to Gary Friedman and what he did with Restoration Hardware.
Right.
Credit to John Reed and what he did with Arhaus. But what those mono-brand retailers do really well is they make the space beautiful in which they show their product.
Without a doubt.
When you walk in, you're inspired. And I think our retailers had to relearn that lesson. That, it's not about just the bulk of space. It's about how well you utilize it. Is it inspiring?
Details.
That's right.
Yes.
And does it reflect to that high-end customer confidence that this is somebody that I feel like can handle a transaction for me? Because every other product that they buy is bought from someone that reflects back to them a feeling of high-end execution. You walk into a Mercedes-Benz dealership and it is reflecting precision and confidence. You walk into a Louis Vuitton, store and it is reflecting that same thing. And so that elevation, and I think we're in the early stages of of retail re-elevating from a display standpoint, will, I hope, create a revitalization in U.S. furniture retail. The design side, I think, is always going to be strong. I think if you're doing anything more than simply buying a couple of pieces that have worn out in your house, if you're doing a room or you're doing a floor or you're doing a house, you want somebody to administer that for you. And part of administration is somebody with great taste that's saying, no, let's do A and not B. And again, we talk AI. AI can render your room 400 times, but it can't tell you which one's in good taste.
No, it's so true.
The designer needs to do that. But even more importantly, then it's the designer that says, okay, we've put together something beautiful. Now we actually have to make it a physical reality, and that's a journey. And
it is a journey.
And if you've been on that journey ever alone, it is arduous and lonely and full of mistakes.
And it shouldn't be walked alone.
No,
I feel like I try to paint that picture all the time that again, I kind of repeat that this industry still has so much growth because, we'll spend money on clothing, like you said, a car. And then when it comes to like selling a room or a sofa, people are like, well, meanwhile, that's your life. That is your
more time on
home
that sofa
in
than
your
you do
home.
in your car.
Correct.
More time on that sofa than you do almost anywhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel
And most people keep that sofa for
Oh, yeah. Way too long, by
Way
the way.
too long.
Replace it more frequently.
Right, exactly.
But no, absolutely. You're making a decision that is going to influence your happiness at the beginning and end of every day in your most important time. Look, there's a lot of cultures who have a history of this idea that space is a health component. It's something that can make you live better, live longer, and live healthier. And the Japanese famously so, but lots of cultures. I think in America, we're waking up to that, but we haven't appreciated it as much as we should, that beauty around you will lift your spirits. Being a better, more positive person will make your life, healthier and happier. If you are healthier and happier, you're likely to live longer. It's just
and it's the
ipso
pride
facto.
thing too. You
Absolutely.
work hard, you spend your hard-earned money and curate in a beautiful curated space on quality products. Like it makes you want to entertain. It makes you want to keep.
That's right.
You're comfortable in that pride, I guess.
I have never been disappointed in life when I spend a little bit more for something nicer. And at the in the moment you go and you sort of squint and you go, should I? But then on the backside of it, I'm always happy.
The reward is there.
Buy myself into a nicer hotel room, I'm always happier. A little bit nicer meal, I'm always happier. Nicer pair of pants, always happier. Nicer pair of shoes, same. Like, can I get $1 cup of coffee or can I go get a $5 cup? I'm
right.
happier
The
at the end of
experience too.
And it's so much.
It
that.
is.
Yeah.
It's all based in that experience.
But to your point about a designer is a companion to come along with you on your design journey, who is, a guide, a Sherpa to make sure that things go smoothly and well, that you end up at the destination that you want to end up at, which may not be the destination you set off to end up at. But along that way, you're sharing it, of course, with your partner or your spouse and your family, but you're also sharing it with this designer who becomes this lifestyle coach.
Yes.
Right? And oftentimes, and I talk to people a lot that have designers that they've worked with for decades.
Yep.
And they are some of their closest friends and confidants.
Without
and when
a
they
doubt.
list their advisors, they say, my accountant, my lawyer,
Yes.
my designer, and my doctor.
Yep.
And I'm like, wow.
It's true,
the
but all
trusted
of them
group.
are wonderful relationships that continue, evolve,
And that process
grow.
should be fun. You're redoing your house. Like, guess what? It's not going to all happen on time. Something is going to go wrong along the way. Like, roll with it. Enjoy it as a process. I'd like to say I'm a big fisherman. I am a fisherman who's not that good at it. But part of going fly fishing is not the 2 fish you're going to catch. It's the day of going fly. It's
the art of the outfit.
That's right. Getting your
and
gear
the
ready ahead of
process.
time.
Yes.
It's driving there and enjoying the beauty. It's putting your waders on and getting your rod set up. It's walking down to the river. It's figuring out what fly you're going to.
Taking it all in.
It's not the minute and a half where you catch the fish.
No.
It's the day of
It's so-
fishing. And that's the same thing in design. It's the process. It's fun. It's interesting.
And there's just so much beauty out there. I wish I could take every client to a High Point showroom. I wish people could see all that beauty that is out there. And I hope that as a design team, that's what we do, bring to the table, bring them,
question.
all this extra elegance that is out there. Because even with the restoration hardware of the world, I get a little, it's again, trying to pigeonhole it's like the cookie cutter house mentality, which I understand, and
they have their look.
They
do
have
it
their
really well.
look, but I'm all wanting
But there's
to
so much more variety out there.
individualize,
And is their look appropriate for some people? Sure, but not for everybody. And the amount of pattern and color and surface detail, and and that's again in our industry, it's the cacophony. It's all of the different instruments in that orchestra where you walk into a show and you go, my goodness, we have not fallen prey to homogenization as an industry where everybody has to look the same. Find your identity, be unique, do something that makes you happy. Don't buy page 32.
Right.
Do you,
Exactly.
right? Do you. So,
I like that.
yeah.
So with the social media world we live in, I always say, like, people are your own brand now from childhood. These, kids are on there. Do you guys use social media as a big tool?
We do. I don't know that we use it as well as we could, but I think probably every company CEO says that. So it's a fundamental part of our marketing and our messaging and our storytelling, as we mentioned earlier. And we're trying to show some behind the scenes, what it looks, what's happening in the factory, what's happening in the showrooms, trying to connect people back to us. But I think that revolution of democratization of customer access, and it's been tough, obviously, for our Shelter Magazine partners. It used to be if you wanted to put your image and your message in front of a customer, you had to go through Architectural Digest or Traditional Home or whoever it was, and it was expensive, so it was done infrequently. It was hard to do. Nowadays, you can get your message out there incredibly easily and affordably, but because they're not these only sort of narrow bully pulpits, you have these narrow pipelines like they used to be in the past. Now it's everybody has the same access. The audience is smaller and smaller. Where if you ran an ad, and still today, if you run an ad in Architectural Digest, hundreds of thousands of people may see it.
Yes.
If you go put something up on Instagram, well, dozens and dozens of people may see it. So you have to be more active, and it's changed the way we think. Again, are we good at it? We're okay. Can we be better? For sure. Do I think it's an improvement over what used to exist? It's like everything. It's better in some ways and worse in others.
Right.
And we're still big fans of our Shelter Magazine friends. We're about to do, matter of fact, the Flower Show House in Nashville with a lot of our partners. And I think a lot of those media properties have figured out how to go beyond just the printed publication. Now they are event organizers, they're experience organizers, and then their printed publication is sort of this platform that they then showcase all this experience creation they do. And so they've evolved, and that's I tell our young people all the time that, look, I don't know what it's going to look like in 3 years, but I can guarantee you it's going to be 100% different than it is today, dramatically so. And we need to be nimble. We need to be comfortable with evolution. We need to be willing to break parts of our business and throw parts of our business away and engage with new things and experiment and mess up. Like trust me, before 10 o'clock every morning, I mess up 4 or 5 times, right? And some of them are quite expensive. It's like, but you have to be durable enough to survive them, and you have to be comfortable enough with risk that you're willing to roll the dice. And the companies that get rigid and start to move into the protectionist mentality, let's just not lose any of what we've gathered.
Right.
Well, guess what? They're always going to leak between your fingers. And if you squeeze harder, they leak faster. So it's much better to say, be willing to lose it all. Be willing to lose big chunks of it and be out
willing
there.
For the risk.
Yeah, take the risk. And it's very hard for our young executives because I think they've grown up in a very risk-averse world. You get the right grade, go to the right school, do always do the right thing.
It's a generational situation.
Yeah, and always get a trophy for, but sometimes you're going to lose. And when you lose, it's okay. And we spend a lot of time talking about what we did wrong. In a very easy, comfortable conversation. But why did that not work? We thought that sofa was going to be wonderful. No one bought it. Why? Let's audit our own problem. Yeah. What did we get wrong about it? We thought that marketing message would really land, but my gosh, the comments on social media are terrible.
Right.
Like, what did we miss here?
So interesting.
We thought this new brand that we were going to stand up was going to be this huge success. Because for me and for a lot of people, the failures that we've had are a whole lot more constructive than the successes we've had. And I want to teach that to our next generation, that it's okay to put yourself out there, to take responsibility, to have it not work out, and to raise your hand and say, I'm sorry, but I've thought through it. I think I did these 2 or 3 things different, and I should have done them this way. I want to try again. That grit to get back up, make it. Sleep on the Scott's towel boxes for a few nights, figure it out, reshelve the shelves and put something else there next to the cash register, because what I had right there, no one's buying. Right? It's those lessons you learn. It was a great book. I'm curious if you ever read it. It was by an author named Paco Underhill, and it's called Why We Buy. No. And it's about the science of retail. And as a former grocery store owner, it would be right up your alley.
I just finished writing a book called Pitch, Sell, Sold.
Pitch, Sell, Sold. I'll look it up. That's cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, the why we buy, a lot of it is the psychology of where you place a product, how it's packaged, that whole the psychology of all those things that matter. And there's a great lesson in there when I was a retailer of if you put your aisles too close together and you put a product mid-aisle and a lady has to reach down to grab it, she's concerned about somebody bumping into her from behind, and she will not do that. And so you have to give her space to reach down to grab a product. And if you don't, then that product placement mid-location, which you think is wonderful because it's reachable, is terrible. Right. And you'll kill your product sales. And you go, my goodness.
Well, just being on the bottom shelf compared to eye level.
Bottom left to eye level.
It's a big difference.
Everybody used to think that putting it right in a pop-up display right as somebody comes in the store, but it takes them 20, 30 feet to like gather themselves and get their wits about them. Yeah. So that first 10 feet is useless. and well, they see it on the way out. Well, they're already past the cash register. It's too late. It's just those basics. And it always fascinated me. It's like the psychology of how you make somebody see, feel, and want your product. And then post-purchase, how do you deliver in a way that makes them want to repeat? And, our brands are very much that way, which is we survived because people's parents owned Hickory Chair and Century. Oh, yeah. And then they bought a piece.
That was back to story.
That's right.
That's the story.
And that trust and confidence that, well, why did you choose us over another brand? Well, because I've heard about you from others that love what they bought from you, or I made a purchase 4 or 5 years ago, and now I'm ready to add to it. And that has held up so well, and my experience has been so good with it that I want to buy again from you. Very different from the disposable. We're durable. So, and with a durable purchase, it has to continue to provide delight and enjoyment over a long period of time. Because if in 6 months it starts to fail on you, well, you have failed the durable purchase test. Right.
So I have to ask you one last question. Everyone gets a job for the first time, or they get hired to run a company. You got hired to run a company, but it wasn't just running a company. It was running a company that your family started, your grandfather started. How did that weigh on you? Does it still to this day?
Still to this day.
Weigh on you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's a lot, I feel, to carry.
It was a lot of anxiety. And so when they put me in charge, so I had worked there for a while, and then when we bought Century from the rest of the family at that point in time, my dad made me president and said, all right,
it's your turn.
Don't mess it up.
Did you ever have a goal of wanting to run your family's business?
I didn't early, but at some point while working at Century in various different layers or levels, I started to have that aspiration that I thought I could. Right. You end up with sort of vague goal of, well, maybe one day if it's possible, and then you start to get the confidence that, well, I think I could do this. And then, as any sort of mid-level executive will tell you, that over time you see enough decisions that you think you would have made differently that you start thinking, well, maybe not only do I think I can, but I think I might be able to even do it better. But then when you get handed the keys, and you go,
literally,
ooh, hang on, and there's a moment of anxiety, and I'm very comfortable in risk. As hobbies, I was a rock climber and a mountain biker, and like plunging off a cliff and not knowing what's at the bottom was something that, and then that sort of carried over into getting into my own retail operation, and which like that sort of tolerant risk kind of mindset is, I think, an important part of my early running of Century, which was, we were rolling the dice. We were buying this furniture company, and it was at an interesting time because it was post the 2008-9 housing collapse. We had not completely rebuilt the revenue level of the company, and here you are, good luck, and by the way, there's a pile of debt, figure it out. I had some pretty good shepherds, some pretty good mentors, but for that first 5-6 months, what I did is sort of, I kind of doubled down on what I knew. Like I was a product guy. I knew the upholstery side really well. I knew the customer and what they were dealing with because I had come from retail. And so I think anytime you get that anxiety of, gosh, I could make a decision big enough here to lose the company, you sort of double down on the bedrocks of what you've learned before. But probably the bigger one for me was not really post-purchase of Century, but the scariest time of my career was the pandemic in May when we were forced to shut the factories down. So the government order came in. And, a good example is our case goods factory in Hickory, North Carolina, has never been closed for more than a week at a time since 1949, right? And there I was in week 3. And when I mean shut down, it was everything was shut down. It was the air compressors were shut down. It didn't hum. Even when it shut down for holiday for a week, there's all these systems that are still running. It's still noisy. It's still, it was dead quiet, dead dark. No one coming into work, and I would drive in just because I couldn't sit at home. So I'd drive in, park my car, unlock the factory, and I would just walk around just to kind of get my head straight. And I'd do it almost obsessively every day. I'd drive to the office, and our case goods factory is huge, 900,000 square foot building connected to the main office. So I'd sit in my office, I'd get, kind of twitchy, and I'd walk out in the factory, and I'd just walk the whole factory. It was almost like a daily ritual. And every day I'd think, it's got to reopen. It's going to, and then those other thoughts.
There's a documentary in that, and what you're talking
it was,
about.
It was an
interesting story.
Yeah, but that fear of if it doesn't reopen, that's kind of on me. Like there'll be extenuating circumstances, but history will still write that like it closed, never reopened, and it was Alex Schuford III running it when it did, third generation, and here it is. And and so that determination to figure it out, we will. There's a funny story when we finally got the order to be able to reopen the facility.
How much time passed?
We were closed for a total, I think, of 5 weeks. We were able for 1 week in the tail end to kind of reopen and then close back down, kind of pulse our way back open. But the longest stretch was, I think we were pushing 3.5 to nearly 4 weeks where we were closed down completely. And
how'd that affect employees?
It was terrible. We continued to pay most of our. We were too big to get a PPP loan. So a little known fact, but any company over 1,000 employees didn't qualify for a loan.
Right.
And so I was pretty irritated about it. We had done everything that the government had told us to do: keep jobs in America, employ people, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then when it came down to it, they said, "Yeah, you did too good a job. You have too many employees. No loans for you." So, but we figured it out. We kept the employees on the payroll. We did all those things that you kind of needed to do to retain your ability to reopen. But it was tough. We did salary cuts across all of our management team. Everybody shared in the pain, and then when we reopened, it was, it's difficult to get people back in the swing. Sometimes you don't know if the systems you turn back on are going to run again. That compressor hadn't been shut down for 15 years. Will it start back up? Will that router run when we go to restart it? But the day before, we were restarting all the factories. And we were super excited. We had all the management team together, and we read the executive order on the requirements to restart. And one of them was that you had to take the temperature of everybody that came into your factory, touchless temperature. And we said, well, geez, how many thermometers do we have? And we sent everybody out to count thermometers. We had like 3 touchless because no one had infrared thermometers. Right. And we said, panic. We have to have something like 29 thermometers to cover all the places our employees come in. So we were like, everybody go out and buy thermometers. And we're all on cell phones calling each other. And there were no touchless thermometers available at any pharmacy in a 3-county area. We kept going further and further out. And I was just dejected. At the end of the day, it's 3:30. We can't find any thermometers. We're not going to be able to open because we can't take people's temperature. Is this really my life? And I'm standing in a Walmart, and I'm in the pharmacy, and I'm looking out across the Walmart, just shaking my head, and I see against the far back wall, there's a children's department. And I was like, I wonder if they have thermometers in the children's department. Yeah, and so I walk over to the kids and children department, and I'm looking around, and next to this little display of like strollers, There's a little wall, and it's got thermometers sitting there.
Oh, God bless.
They're sold out in the pharmacy, but no one thought to go to the baby section.
There's your
And I bought all 3 of them they had, and I got on the cell phone and I called everybody. I said, go to Walmart, go to the kids department. They've got thermometers. And we came back and everybody had we poured them all out on the conference room table. We must have had 40 thermometers. And we were literally dancing in the boardroom. We were so excited that we were able to buy thermometers so that we could reopen the factory the next day. And I mean, we're high-fiving, and you would have thought we would have just won a Nobel Prize. But it's those, and by the way, that sticks in my memory. That moment of collective, a collective win. And it was a small win, but it was fundamental, and it created a cultural moment. Like everyone wanted the same thing: get our people back to work. They want to be back to work. We want them back to work. We're not going to be held up by a thermometer.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up, because it means that Rock House Family Farm Brands is in very good hands.
Well, at least we have the ability to take a temperature.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate you coming to see us today.
It's been a delight. Thank you.
Thank you.
iDesign Labs podcast is an SW Group production in association with the 5-Star and TW Interiors. To learn more about iDesign Lab or TW Interiors, please visit twinteriors.com.